Well, welcome back to Potter's Passages 006. We're covering today chapters 14 and 15, short selection. And we're back with Mr. West Chance and Miss Sarah Miller. It's great to have you two back.
Hey, good to be here.
Hey, good evening.
And so we were just talking before we got on. It's funny, there's so many things to say. On the one hand, there's a competing podcast with one of our friends called named Mr. Oscar Ortiz, who recently posted his materials online, and a lot of people have been listening to that podcast, so there might be a little bit of rivalry brewing between his and ours. So they're totally different in their content. That's the Great Men podcast, and this is the Harry Potter one. But then also Sarah and I were talking a little bit about where does this podcast go after we finish, because it looks like this is the penultimate, that's her word, not mine, podcast for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And so I suppose the first question is, y'all looking to finish this and do the second book, The Chamber of Secrets?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that was so easy. Perfect. Awesome. And so Sarah we were also talking about maybe even going through the traditional canon, not only the Harry Potter books and potentially even comparing movies at some point, depending on how interweaving and interwoven we want to be, but also going through the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and I know you're teaching the Hobbit right now through Signum University, Wes, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that, especially if we're all going to talk about it.
I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a program they started last year. The university itself came out of a professor I had at college who taught Tolkien at the university level, and then was starting to get into podcasting, and found that was just as rewarding and offered him a lot more freedom than teaching at the brick and mortar classroom. So he went full time with that, like 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know. So he was kind of early into that game of podcasting, and he came at it from a more traditional angle. So he had that kind of background. But otherwise, in what we're doing, he reads the text closely in collaboration with a bunch of like really involved students all around the world, and they just have live discussions of it. It's really cool. You guys should check it out. What I do is geared towards kids, and that's their summer program. Like I said, started last year. This is my first year teaching it, and I'm finding out a lot about The Hobbit as I go through it with this level of care. So it's great.
I was just looking it up, Wes, and like the Mythgard thing. I feel like I've used a lot of his resources in teaching in teaching fantasy in general, and Lord of the Rings in specific. I feel like I've definitely used some of this. Probably uncredited.
He is the Tolkien professor. I mean, that's what his original website was called, and the name has stuck. But his name
Mythgard,
is Corey Olsen.
Yeah, I've definitely used it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. So let's dive into this text. So our first chapter is about Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. And well, what's interesting about this, I mean, just one aspect, of course, is that the dragon gets bigger and bigger in Hagrid's hut as we go through this chapter, and easier and easier to see, and becomes more and more obvious and harder to conceal. And it just strikes me, there's this story that Jordan B. Peterson tells. It's a children's story, which you can buy, called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon, where this small little dragon in a house keeps getting bigger and bigger, and this little child sees it and keeps addressing it, but the child's mom keeps saying, there's no such thing as a dragon. So the dragon just gets bigger and bigger and eats the kid's soup, and then eventually takes the house away, which is some sort of metaphor for divorce. And only eventually gets small enough again once it's recognized for what it is. And I thought, just because we were talking about the metagame between Albus Dumbledore and Voldemort a little bit yesterday, and you can please tell me if this is too much of a stretch, where Norbert is released is at the top of the castle, the highest astronomy tower. And so it struck me that it's like the dragon, which is getting bigger, or the symbol of the serpent or of evil, is getting closer and closer to the top castle, or is getting closer and closer to manifesting itself again, as if I know we see explicit signs in the next chapter where the three Centaurs are capable of seeing Mars is very bright, even though McGonagall, from earlier on, as well as Hermione, don't necessarily think that astronomy is a very rigorous art. But I wondered if that was like a foreshadowing. This dragon that grows in the hut of Hagrid in this small terrestrial space. I'm starting to understand Hagrid is sort of a terrestrial version of Dumbledore. Like he's the earthy god, the Hermes to the Zeus, the earthy form of the celestial one. But I wondered if, because the Norbert chapter, in a way, even though it sets the action of seeing the Forbidden Forest, is sort of self-contained.
It is, yeah. It seems like that dragon book has got to be selling a lot of copies since Peterson started talking about it so much. And I don't know, maybe J.K. Rowling read it or just had a similar idea, because now you mention it, it's got a lot of overlap here. The thing that struck me about it was that if you're right that there's a kind of parallel between Hagrid and Dumbledore, which seems to have something to it, well then it's pointing out what Dumbledore's weakness is, right? If Hagrid's weakness in some sense reflects Dumbledore's
trust.
Dumbledore is trust, right? And loving something that he loves regardless of how dangerous it is. Right?
Yes.
And puts a lot of people in danger, including himself, that he may or may not realize and be okay with. So
yes, and just to add to that, we also see a sort of traumatic moment with Neville. Again, I know we've been paying a special attention to him, but it's an even worse moment by the fact that he doesn't, that what happens to him is misrepresented to him to make it even more hurtful to him. He goes to warn Harry that Draco is going to trick him, or is going to entrap him, or is going to get McGonagall, that he's going to tell Harry that Draco knows it and is going to do something in order to punish Harry, which will also hurt Gryffindor because they will lose points. But how McGonagall understands the situation, because she never saw the dragon that was being sent away, she thinks that Neville was just tricked by Harry attempting to trick Draco, which would mean that Harry tricked Neville. And so that then, like, the hero figure that he looks up to, who's his friend, even he would be treating him like Draco treats him, which is all the sadder, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a tough moment, because based on everything we've seen so far, you're gonna expect Harry to come out with the truth there to spare his friend this pain, but he doesn't, right? He just takes the punishment, and that's a big shift in the story. I think a big turning point.
I think that one thing that Wes, I like how you put that you expect Harry to tell the truth, to be kind to his friend Neville, who he's been, well, I don't know if they're friends, but this person that he's sort of looked out for a while, and he chooses to be selfish, or at least to protect their larger mission. And to me, it's like the thing about the dragon and all of these characters, they really seem out of their depth, like at a variety of points. And like when they're out of their depth, they sort of revert to this kind of all of these things that make them at their best selves, who they they're the best version of themselves. I mean, like, Hagrid's out of his depth with this dragon. Harry is out of his depth when he gets caught. They forget the invisibility cloak at the top of the tower. Like, even Hermione, like the smartest of the smart little girls, like, and boys for that matter, the smartest of the students, she's, I really expected better from you. I expected you to have more sense, was what McGonagall said. Like, everybody's out of their depth. Even Malfoy is out of his depth. He's like cowering behind this like gross, like slobbering dog. He's so terrified that, like, when things grow, so I mean, maybe I don't know the story that Dr. Peterson talks about. I'm not as versed in him, but that, like, what happens when you are out of control? all of them seem really out of control.
Well, yeah. So what's interesting about that, and it goes back to the lecture I gave on the cover about the placement of Fluffy at the bottom of the castle, and the discussion we've been having about the meta game, the game inside the game. And Ferenz brings this up, in fact, when he talks to Harry, right? He says, "Have you learned much up at the school?" And Harry says, "A bit." He says, "Well, a bit, that's something." And then he uses this Socratic line of questioning, right? He asks Harry 3 questions. He says, "Do you know what unicorn blood is used for?" And guides Harry, and he says, "Do you know what's in the castle? And do you know what you can produce in the castle?" And Harry comes to understand what the situation is through this questioning from him. But the idea seems to be that a true education is exposure to the unknown, which forces you to adapt to a situation in order to ingest the new information or behave in such a way as to be maximally successful within the situation. And so so that would be like, say, the true purpose of education, to expose people to things slightly beyond their depth, so that they constantly improve their adaptive capacities, so that they become problem solvers, as it were.
Well, and I absolutely I see that, and that actually gets back to this idea of, like, we've been talking about, like, why is their education so much more dangerous than what we would imagine education in the primary world to be, but also, like, it seems like they're a little too out of their depth,
right?
I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because at the very least, it really, and it might have something to do with their perceptions as first years, because there's so much out in front of them. But I thought there was an interesting prefiguration or foreshadowing of Umbridge's way of teaching, as opposed to, say, Lupin's, where Malfoy expects just to write lines, and of course that's what Umbridge makes Harry do. Completely useless activity that will teach them nothing. Whereas these students, now they're going out to start to learn like a field lesson, as it were. And so now they're being exposed to the unknown in a way that tests their skills and also shows their character, because of course we see that Fing is a coward, Draco is a coward and a trickster. We also see that Harry's fairly brave. And so sorry, just to go back to one point you said about Hermione losing her sins, I just want to ask one question to y'all. What about that punishment by McGonagall of 50 points from every single one of the Gryffindors? 20 points from Malfoy, but 50 points from each of the Gryffindors. What?
I when I saw that, I thought to myself, well, because so she earlier, she circumvented punishment to get Harry on the Quidditch team, right? Because she said, I want to wipe the smile off of Severus Snape's face. I can't for the life of me manage or handle Slytherin winning the House Cup again. But here she chooses not just punishment, but almost a harsh or extreme punishment of her own students, like her own house. And I wonder if behind that wasn't sort of some of the classic mom tactic, like, I expected better from you. Like, I expected this from Malfoy, but I didn't expect it from you. So the fact that you've failed to live up to my expectations so much makes my punishment even harsher.
It does she does seem to differentiate her instruction, right? The reason she's disappointed for each of them is where each of them is weak. Longbottom, because you were easily deceived. Harry, because you didn't care enough about others and take your responsibility seriously to Gryffindor. Hermione, you're supposed to be the thinker.
And like, it's almost, I think it reminded me of that part of the conversation we had a couple sections ago, where we talked about, well, what's more useful to, like, proper education? Is it mercy, which is what she shows him with the flying, or is it, like, really adhering to the rules? And I wonder if in the back of her mind, is it what's going to teach them how to be good if I bend the rules for them, or if I'm really harsh? And it really does kind of seem to work for Harry and Hermione, who are both like, no, we're not going to get involved. We need to focus on our studies. Like, it seems to have the effect of shame. I'm like always kind of hesitant about how much we should wield that as a tool for behavior modification. I do think like a healthy measure of shame is really important, but like, he's haunted by how much he lets down his own house, and that's because of what she says to him and how other people treat him. It seems like in this case that's the most effective punishment, no matter how unfair it seems. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to get towards earlier, but I just never finished it, is that it's as if the world is becoming more and more real. We talk and emotionally and experientially. So we talked earlier about how things are different and the same. So even though you're at a school, the stairways change and there are ghosts flying around. And even though you have many different sorts of classes, like you have to go do astronomy and stare at the stars, and you have to go to the herbology gardens outside, you still have boring history classes with Mr. Westchance's Professor Benz, where you just copy things down, though, with your quill. And perhaps you have a clever way of making your quill just auto go right rather than you writing it yourself. But now Harry, who first entered the magic world as pure celebrity, is now experiencing utter humiliation, not only in his own house, but in front of Slytherin, who actively humiliate him, and also Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff hate him because they were hoping that Slytherin would finally lose the House Cup after 7 years. And so he's now encountering danger out in the Forbidden Forest, where he has to actually express his skill, and he's experiencing tremendous embarrassment, very similar probably to the embarrassment he would feel when he was at the same school as Dudley. And he would be wearing, too big of clothes and getting pushed around by Dudley. It's almost as if this territory for him must feel extremely similar. And in fact, he tries to quit the Quidditch team too. He's so ashamed. I don't know. Yeah. Well, Wes, what do you think about that as a teacher? He's been totally humiliated and ashamed. I mean, what is he to do in this situation? And is he justified?
I would. I had a thought about McGonagall's punishment. That she seems to be, and I think she's punishing them, of course, and Gryffindor, but it also seems like she's punishing herself in so doing, right? And what you said, Sarah, made me think about that, because maybe she realizes that she was too lenient before, and it's backfired, and now she needs to swing way too far the other way, and she's not really sure where to land on that spectrum. I've definitely been there, and I've been on the other side of it too, of being the student who is very ashamed by the punishment that they were not expecting at all, right? Because they're in their moment of great elation when they forget the invisibility cloak up there. They forget that key detail, and then it comes crashing down. I definitely know how that feels. And to the thing about reality, the way that the enchantments are described by Hagrid, it's like their teachers, each of the classes that they take, each of those teachers has contributed to the enchantments surrounding the Sorcerer's Stone. So in a way, it's taking what had been just academic classes, and now it's real. Like you said, this is deadly earnest to defend this most precious of objects from the most dangerous of wizards.
That's right. That's so interesting, because also the fact that they go out to the Forbidden Forest, which is forbidden to them explicitly by Dumbledore when they first start the term, is that they have to experience an exile after their misbehavior. They must go out to the place which is unprotected, and they must do penitence. And this sort of penitence is actually dangerous. They actually have to do a deed that is helpful to their society in order to return into it. It strikes me as a fairly effective thing to do. I mean, of course, the Athenians, they had the 10-year ostracism, and we know some of our great writers like Dante was in exile and wrote from exile. his entire life. And so it's almost as if this moment is trying to give them perspective on that which Hogwarts offers to them, which they have failed to understand by misobeying its rules.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Looks like we might have just lost Sarah, but go with that point, and then we'll loop back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, while you're trying to get her back on there, the way that the punishment seems to fit, in some sense of what they had been doing wrong. Their transgression was going too high, sneaking around, and being out late at night. And in some ways, the punishment is kind of like the parallel to that too, because they instead have to go down to the dark forest, right, where they aren't supposed to be. It's night again. It's sort of like ratcheting up the danger, right, because they're outside the castle now. But they are still supervised, and Hagrid makes that pretty clear. Like, you're not actually in danger. It's just scary, just send up sparks. But then we see right away that Hagrid doesn't know how dangerous it is. There's something there that he's not encountered before, and he knows it. And now it's real. Again, the punishment was kind of safe, kind of dangerous, but now it's quite supremely and clearly outside the bounds. And then the Centaurs.
Yeah, and something interesting about that is that the most dangerous thing out in the wilderness is the most dangerous thing within the bounds of civilization. It's not a werewolf. It's not a centaur. It's not a giant spider or a basilisk. What is it? It's a man. It's a man possessed of an evil idea. Well, let's get Sarah back on here.
All right.
And so before we cut off last time, and sorry about that to the listeners, we were talking about the Forbidden Forest. The scariest thing in the Forbidden Forest seems to be man possessed of an evil idea, just as the scariest thing in, say, the castle might be something like man. But then in the interim, we got to thinking a little bit about Ron, and so it seems like we're seeing Ron miss out on some of the fun in these chapters, in place of, and is replaced sort of by Hermione, also I guess partly by Malfoy and Neville. What did y'all make of that exactly?
I was taken aback. Like, it took me a while to realize that Ron wasn't there, and then I was like, wait, where's Ron? And I had to go back and like see, oh yeah, that's right, he's like poisoned in the infirmary. Of course. Gotcha. Okay. So it's just like, it's like something where you get so used to having that thing there, and then when it's gone, you suddenly appreciate it again, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not really, I can't quite give an account for why there is no Ron. I mean, I noticed it, but I wondered, like, what if his traits that we've seen thus far don't serve in this moment? I mean, maybe it's his, I'm not entirely sure what it is. He does seem to be more, he's not comfortable with dragons, but he seems to know a lot about dragons, so he's not as terrified of them, perhaps. I don't know. What do we know about Ron that makes him less useful for the story?
Well, I want to try a really interesting attempt here. So what poisons him and gets him into Madame Pomfrey's hospital is the fact that he's bitten by the dragon, right? And so what starts to happen here is that Harry starts to make a couple heroic differentiating moves from Ron. Not only is he on the Quidditch team as Seeker, which is a small different thing, he's going to go out into the Forbidden Forest, ride on a centaur, which is apparently very rare, also see a dead unicorn, also see a vampire-like creature, and take the mettle of himself in confronting the unknown. Ron will do that later, but what I'm wondering is perhaps whether the dragon biting Ron, and we'll see this later in the series, and perhaps we see its roots here, is like the beginning of envy seeping in on him. The difference between the choices the hero makes and is ultimately successful with, and those who are near to the hero but are not ultimately as heroic or as successful, like the difference between Achilles and Patroclus, or something like that. Yeah.
No, that seems right. I mean, the symbol of the serpent, right, biting him, that definitely rings true. And I think in terms of like the narrative economy of it, like Sarah, you're talking about like, why doesn't he fit in the story here? Like, he might just literally not fit, like there's enough characters there, and to have Ron along would upset the symmetry of it. Well, all right, so let's have like this one bad thing happen to him, so these other bad things can happen to them, and then they're all kind of down in their various ways, and then they've got to rebuild, you know.
Can I ask it? This might be totally pushing us off track, but I have to say that, like, when they were in the Forbidden Forest, as I understood it, the reason Hermione and Harry have detention is because they tried to do something to save their friend Hagrid.
Yes.
And I just find it funny that they served detention with Hagrid, like, because they were doing something to save him.
Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense too. Again, like the meta story, like they did the thing that is most right, but the institution that protects
right
still punished them for going against the rules of it. And so they then bond together more and pursue that which is dangerous together, showing, I think, that what they did was ultimately correct. Because they're actually even literally physically pushed closer together because of that event. It's as if they worked through their first fight as a group of friends or something like that. Like because the dragon is small, but then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and starts to get between them all and even bites Ron, and then he has to lie to Madame Pomfrey and risk his health for some time. I don't know. I'm just
The other side of that, I think, like I've been trying to kind of harp on a little bit, like Malfoy's fascination with this group of friends comes to the fore again, because he's like spying on them and trying to like listen what, eavesdrop and peek through the windows, and he's just like so desperate to like break into this little friend group, and it's just so sad. Poor
Do you think oh my god. Don't pity that little brat. Like,
mercy or fairness. I see where Sarah falls on this with Malfoy.
Do you think that his like constant following them is like rooted in in jealousy over their closeness? Because I think that's really interesting. If it is, I mean, it's kind of like armchair psychology, but.
Yeah, well,
I mean, what if he just wants a real friend? Like,
but I think that's part of it, because if he's in Slytherin and is also very wealthy, then part of what he manifests is like the rigid nature of tradition. And so if you think about Crabbe and Goyle as also images of like columns of tradition, are they very interesting? Do they have much personality? Are they doing new things? It's like the golden snitch perpetually follows around Harry's group, because they're always up to no good. They're always doing something different from everybody else. There's always some information embedded in their actions that is not embedded in everybody else's actions. It's almost like Fred and George also have that going on, but nobody else is allowed to do what Fred and George do. Only they can get it. It sounds like somebody's pulling by the way, which is an interesting sound.
Sorry.
But that Malfoy also is attracted to that which is attractive in them, not just Neville, not just Malfoy. Yeah. So Wes, I don't know. Yeah. What is it that these kids embody with each other that does make them worthy of being noticed?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the fascination of Harry Potter, right? Like from the start, he's special. And even the Centaur notices it, right? He's like, oh, like this is Harry Potter. The normal rules, you've got to kind of bend them for this guy. So that's like one of the more, like you point out, that's one of the more exceptional things that sets Harry apart here. In the little episode in the Forbidden Forest, where he doesn't even know what's going on. Again, he's sort of the passive like locus of this amazing thing happening, which is beyond his comprehension at this point.
Yeah. Well, let me just change gears really quickly and talk about the Centaurs. Are y'all interested in those?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I just want to throw a couple classical allusions down for Centaurs. So there are three major stories that should be in our mind when we think about Centaurs. One, which is the most famous in all ancient history, is about the wedding of the Lapiths, which the Centaurs were invited to, and then they attempted to abduct and rape the bride. after getting drunk. And so they're symbols of licentiousness in some ways. And the second most famous centaur was a centaur named Nessus, whom was killed by Heracles, when Nessus attempted to steal the wife of Hercules, or the girlfriend at that time. I believe it was a Megara, but it might have been Deianira. I think it was Megara, though. I'm fairly certain. And Nessus actually ultimately leads to Heracles dying because he was wearing a sweater that he said had a love potion on it, but actually it had Hydra blood oozed on it from Heracles's arrow, which Megara then gave to Heracles to maintain his love, but ended up just burning his flesh and ending up killing him. So terrible. But the third one is a centaur named Chiron, who's very different from many of the other centaurs. He was known to be Achilles' teacher, which is what the Phil from the Disney movie Hercules is supposed to represent, even though he's a satyr and not a centaur. They got many things wrong.
Well, his girlfriend's name is Megara in the movie.
That they did get right. That they nailed. The fact that they had a Greek god Hades constantly using like Yiddish and Hebrew words like Meshuggah and things like that, I thought was also very Hollywood and funny. So the difference between Chiron and all the other centaurs is that rather than being unruly and drunken and being sort of a symbol of bestiality overcoming one's rational intellect or consciousness, is that he teaches the arts to Achilles. And so he teaches him to hunt, he teaches him to play music, he teaches him to speak, and he teaches him to sing. And so it's as if one is cultivated by one's own instincts, or the ultimate instinct is to cultivate one's instincts into a harmony. And so
that's good.
What Harry runs into out here in these centaurs, and we see the Bane figure, who's like a Nessus, right, who's violent, and we see Chiron and Nessus both down in the Inferno amongst the violent.
I was just going to say, I feel like I know these names from Canto 12 and like the River of Boiling Blood. But
yes, they are there. They're there amongst the violent. And the idea is that their very nature is violence because two natures coming together. But how that might apply to Harry, and again, the education he's receiving, again, in this unknown, is that he is allowing his instincts. And this is something that's actually mentioned. When he's alone with Hermione, he can hear sharper. He can see clearer. He's using his wits. And so when he runs into this Chiron-like centaur who guides him through questioning, it's as if his instincts here are guiding him to the appropriate action in the situation. It's as if he's learning to rely on his instincts rather than just what he learns in books, which also seems to be the thing that he can do better than Hermione, as evidenced through his Quidditch and broomstick prowess.
I got to throw out before we go too far from the illusions. I think the ones in Lewis, like the Narnia books, are probably the more like immediate reference that because of the astrology thing. Isn't that like part of as his centaurs do? I don't remember those books that well now, but I know that they're in there, and I know they do stuff.
Well, Lewis was I mean, he was a medievalist. He was obsessed and an intellectual, in fact, like a scholar of medieval literature and medieval philosophy and theology. And there's a really persuasive argument written by oh God, I'm gonna forget his name, but it's called C.S. Lewis and the Planets. And it's basically this argument that there's always been sort of a way, like an attempt to kind of connect each of the Lewis stories, each of the Narnia installments with some element of the Bible. They're so overtly Christian in some ways, but this person, this professor, I heard him speak at the University of Chicago, wrote a book called Planet Narnia, and it's named Michael Ward. I just Googled it, Michael Ward. And he writes about how the different planets affect kind of like the ambiance of each story more than Aslan being the Jesus figure obviously in the The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that's visible, but that not every Narnia story is representative of a biblical story. It's like that the Prince Caspian, for example, represents the Mars quality of God, and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe represents the magnanimity, the Jupiter quality of God. That like this medieval understanding of this medieval spirituality that was fused with Christianity in like the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, saw these planetary elements in the one Christian God. And that Lewis wrote these stories to kind of amplify that dimension, I guess.
I definitely want to address the idea too that is part of the imprecision of astronomy, is making connections between the stars in an intuitive rather than a rational way. And I want to talk a little bit about what Mars means in the Ptolemaic Dantist system, because maybe we see what Harry's future is through this. But Wes, why were you asking about the more immediate predecessor of the Centaur? Is there a marked difference in Lewis's Centaur from the Nessus or the Chiron figures?
I don't think I wanted to say more than just they're also there and they look at stars and have stuff to do with prophecy. Yeah, that's about it.
Good. Okay, so in Dante's Paradiso, I know you both know this text. The sphere of Mars is the sphere of holy warriors, largely crusaders. And so something interesting we've been talking about is the battle between good or God, Albus Dumbledore, the white one, or that which gives light, that which exposes, and he who must not be named, whose even name is hidden, right? The dark one, Voldemort. And so it makes me wonder whether Mars is bright tonight. A is supposed to indicate that a holy warrior is coming to be or is going to really shine on this night, or B, whether the aspect of Mars as Ares, as the god of violence and of physical aggression, whether Mars is bright precisely because something just so atrocious and violent against nature is being done, of killing something pure, a unicorn. And the next question would be, do you think the killing of something pure is part of Harry's education, where he is himself losing his naive innocence or purity in the magical world in the face of seeing actual evil outside the walls of Hogwarts, in the forest? He is now not poisoned, but or even traumatized, but his illusions that the magical world is pure and good disappear as well. So those are the three things I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I saw the repetition of the Mars is bright tonight, I Googled a little bit of what could this possibly mean? And, the Reddit boards were definitely full of ideas. But I guess I feel like, on the one hand, I think it's kind of early in the series to see this, to see this great big clash of good versus, of the God figure versus the evil, the embodiment of evil. I mean, there's so many moments in what we read for today that to me foreshadowed other moments in the story, just like references in the entire, like the Harry's fear of werewolves to me references ironically his attachment to Lupin. They mentioned dittany, which is something that is necessary for saving Ron from permanent damage.
Right, and I'm not suggesting it's fully hashed out yet, but that if it is an ongoing battle throughout the entire series, then it is already happening in small ways.
I see it as figuring this, like, as adding to this sense that like great violence is happening or about to happen, and I guess I read it as more tied to what was going on in the forest. But also, now that I say that, like,
yeah, and I think that's a level of analysis.
Now that I say that, I think the Centaurs, I mean, they're when what's his name? I think it's either Bane or is it? Well, it's the one who says, no, I guess it's Bane. He says, we are sworn not to set ourselves against the heavens. Have we not read what is to come in the movements of the planets? And that's when he sees Firenze carrying Harry, which I think is like, that's another thing that we haven't yet talked about, which is like this intervention of fate versus choice. But maybe it is that the Centaurs have this knowledge of what's to come in the next 7 books. I don't know. And per your other question of, is it a sin, really? Is it such a crime to destroy something so innocent? It reminded me very much of that quote from Atticus Finch. I don't know if you guys read To Kill a Mockingbird when you were young, but where he talks about, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird, which is where obviously the title of the book comes from, but it's because mockingbirds do nothing but sing. Mm-hmm. Like they don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy, sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill them. That like it just really reminded me of that quote. And I think for most modern readers in 1999 who have all read To Kill a Mockingbird, that's something that they would all remember, certainly.
Yeah, well, it seems to place it with that language of innocence, place it within a big, conversation that definitely includes the likes of Lewis, as much as there's also the classical references that's starting to come to the fore more. And what you said about destiny and morality and how those things interact. The Centaurs, of course, are interesting in that they're not human, and they have a totally different approach to they're striving to be objective in their view of events, and they like to really distinguish themselves from humans in that way, it seems like. So as far as in what sense they are foretelling the remainder of the books, yeah, that it does set up, these last chapters do set up a lot of elements that should kind of like spark our interest to keep going with the series and see how it develops. Yeah.
Alex, what do you think? How would you answer your own questions?
Well, so, I mean, if I just focus on one part of the question, I do think what we see here is a necessary loss of Harry's innocence in order to face evil at the end of the book for the first time. And because he's been wrong constantly about the source of evil, right? He thinks it's Snape.
Right.
He thinks it's Draco. And he continues to conclude that it must be Snape. He continues to come to the wrong conclusion. And even in the wake of feeling his scar burn for the second time in the presence of this hooded figure, this masked figure, this figure whose head is hooded in the same way that you or he who must not be named name is hooded or hidden. And so what I think is happening here is what has to happen to. So in Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan can sneak into Eden because he tricks an angel named Uriel by transfiguring himself and changing how he looks. And Uriel has never experienced a lie or a liar before, so he is incapable of dealing with the figure of evil. And so what it seems to suggest to me is that part of a good education is exposing somebody, at least in a symbolic way, to evil, so that when they face it in the world, when they face malevolence in the world, they aren't shattered by it, or they have some defense against the dark arts against it, which I think is also part of the why Quirrell is the defense against the dark arts teacher, because he gives the ultimate final exam, right? Defeat the evil inside of me. It's like, wow. Yeah. But so that would be my response to that I think that it's a necessary loss of innocence and exposure to evil in order to face evil when it manifests in front of Harry, which it will at the end of the book. And then over and over.
So are you saying that he has to see this dead unicorn slaughtered, and he has to see someone that like maybe his breaking of the rules such that he gets detention.
Yes, ends up being a Felix culpa because he sees something that even Hagrid has never seen. This is not a normal thing to see at all.
Right.
And then he rides on this Ferenz, this centaur, which is not allowed. He's not a common mule, as Bane says. And then Ferenz, jumps at him and says, "Do you know who this is? This is Harry Potter." Sort of like, this is Jesus or something like that.
I was going to say, like, then that, I mean, getting back to why McGonagall gave them such stiff punishments and how Harry and Hermione seem to do what's right, regardless of the rules, or perhaps the consequence, or maybe even the risk. That opens up another question of what's the moral argument through that then, if this transgression leads to this experience of detention, which leads to this discovery for him, this discovery of something horrific, which ultimately is a way for him to eventually defeat or face evil, then if it traces back to this breaking of some human rule, that seems important. Right? In understanding the morality being like perpetuated, and that like you do what's right regardless of whether or not it's that maybe their courage is about figuring out what rules to break.
Yes, and it even seems as if getting in trouble teaches you more than staying safe. And I kind of want to shoot this question at Wes, just because Wes, I know you just finished Maps of Meaning and writing a review on it. And does Sarah's articulation of how she just explained it ring any bells to you? I know I think of a particular story that Peterson has great familiarity with that involves a Felix culpa like this, that a breaking of the objective rules leads to a betterment of the human situation in some way or the other.
No, I was just gonna talk about the way that this hooded figure is breaking the rule, and how he has this strategy in doing so, whereas when they broke the rule, they didn't have the same kind of overarching strategy. Although the way that Sarah's describing it, it's like you can sort of understand it that way, like they're placing these values in a hierarchy, and they're going after the higher values and at the cost of breaking the lower ones. But it's somehow very different from the way that Voldemort kills the unicorn so that he can stay alive long enough to go ahead and try to get the Sorcerer's Stone. Like there's some kind of connection there, but it looks awfully different when you say it that way.
Well, I would say I would say, well, the connection I see with how she formulated it is it reminds one of the Fall, that in breaking one rule, so there's a rule laid down: don't eat from the apple of wisdom, or the pomegranate of wisdom, depending on how persnickety you are. And but they don't follow that rule in order to develop the logos or consciousness or self-consciousness. And so the idea seems to be, well, even though that was bad because now you experience suffering and childbirth and work and all of that, you now can make your own free choices. Free will now exists in the world. And so you're punished by that which you've done through these consequences. You're also capable of achieving your own reward through making your own choices in the world. And so sort of a Jungian idea on that is that that's a Felix culpa as well, is that they didn't mean to do what they did. And I see what you're saying, that Voldemort, like sort of the dark side Sith characters, he has a plan. He intends to consciously do harm, whereas these characters, Hermione and Harry, they just sort of accidentally did, even though they did plan to do what they did, it was misrepresented as bad to McGonagall. He's playing like a very high stakes game. Drink some of this unicorn blood and be cursed until you can get the Sorcerer's Stone. Meaning, at least to Harry at this point, that Snape knows all that he needs to know in order to get to the Sorcerer's Stone. Even though it will be Quirrell, it will lead to the same actions by Harry. And so,
I think. Well, so a part of I've not read Maps of Meaning, don't know Jordan B. Peterson beyond the Joe Rogan podcast I listen to. But part of the Felix Culpa is not just that you get, I mean, this is perhaps my 20 years of Catholic education, but that it's not just the like the consciousness that you get of one's own self, but theologically the Felix Culpa, the error of Adam and of Eve, is what allows for the redemption of Christ.
That's right, and it drives them into life.
Yeah, it makes necessary, and the incarnation, and then the incarnation makes the crucifixion and the resurrection possible, and all of it all hinges, oddly enough, on this error, on this happy fault, like happy mistake. But to me, I think what the redemption of Christ, and not to like, this seems like kind of a huge stretch, but what differentiates to me what, like, the Felix Culpa, shall we say, of Harry and Hermione breaking the rule and Voldemort transgressing a rule or a custom or a taboo, shall we say, is that one is aimed, principally Hermione and Harry's is aimed at like what's good for the community and keeping people together and making sure Hagrid doesn't get fired for having a dragon. And like they're attempting to do something that knits together a diverse community of people, because I think, like, behind all of this is, it's hard for me to forget Voldemort's demands for purity, right? Yeah. Like his enthusiasm for a homogeneity of the wizarding world that dominates the Muggles and dominates the mixed. And it's hard for me to separate that from, like, some of, say, like, Nazi ideology, right? So they transgress all kinds of taboos, right? Right, yeah, like they transgress all kinds of taboos, but that doesn't make it okay. It's driven at division. It's driven at a world organized in a way that some people are at the top and they are above you, and some people are at the bottom and they're below you. And there's something about the fact, to me, that Harry, Hermione, and Hagrid are all, like, in the forest together. Some of them are serving detention, one of them is monitoring their detention, but that they earned detention trying to do something good for the person who is monitoring them. Like, it just seems like they broke a rule aimed at a community of diverse creatures and beings being in harmony, and Voldemort breaks a rule with the goal of being over people. Right. And I think is what separates them.
I think the fundamental difference is that they break an institutional rule, whereas Voldemort here breaks the law of nature.
Yes, that's another great example.
I think they follow
much better way of formulating.
Well, I think you put it, yeah, but I started getting the essence of it out of there. But yeah. So they break an institutional rule, but they maintain the law of friendship and getting your friends back. Whereas Voldemort is, well, just look at the situation. He's using the body of somebody else, and then already, so he's already utilizing somebody, not in a friendship way, not in a cooperative way, in a dominating way, like you were saying. And then he's killing something pure, so that's additional cost and use of something not mutually beneficial. And so, well, I guess that's about as far as I can go with the thought at that point. But he does seem to have a totally different method by which he goes about doing that which he does, and perhaps we'll get into the psychology and the symbology of evil through his figure and how he develops, because he does have a long sort of developmental process of getting back to form. This sort of like, what Sauron never does in The Lord of the Rings. And so, I don't know, that was very powerful. Wes, what were you thinking on that?
No, I just, I think that there's a lot of interpretive wiggle room with the whole concept of the fortunate or happy fall, the Felix Culpa thing. There, I think you guys kind of covered sort of the two extremes pretty well. And I think what's interesting about this story is that as we get towards the end of book one, we are sort of kind of suddenly, I thought, confronted with this sort of heavier thematic content, whereas for quite a while in the story it's just like, okay, like this is fun and interesting and there's like new stuff and it's all very magical, and then unicorn blood, like, whoa, okay. So
And scream. Yeah. So, well, what that makes me wonder is a really important question, Wes, which we didn't have a chance to ask you last time, but but Sarah and I answered, and there's a bit of a tangent. If you were to look in the mirror of Erised, Wes, what would you see?
I guess I'd see the thing that at this point, what I most want, I think, is like Harry family. And so I think I'd fall more on his end of it than the Ron, like the self-aggrandizing. And what exact form that would take is locked deeply in my subconscious where it should stay, I guess. But
here's my one question about that, because I know you just wrote that review of Peterson, is that I was listening to him today, and in chapter 4, he talks about the difference between a home to a child and a home to an adult man, that the home to a child is that place that is provided for one, whereas one is the figure of a father, the home is the place that one is responsible for, that one helps to provide. And if you were to look in the mirror now at this point, would you be now that figure, or coming to be that figure, or not?
I'm pretty sure the former. Yeah. The thing about the answer that Dumbledore gives Harry, though, like, it seems suitable to me that the way that you answer that question best is with the answer suited to the person you're speaking to, right? And so if a child asks you that question, then you tell them something that's sort of like a fitting answer for the way that they see you, right? So I want some woolen socks and not books all the time.
So in his teaching aspect, and so in your teaching aspect too, he's guiding our desire, just as you might be guiding our desire through your response.
That and the sense of, like, you don't shatter the sense of your the image that person has of you as the figure that knows a lot of stuff, right? And like has the answers. And I think that's brought back around here too, because the invisibility cloak is just forgotten, like for pages and pages, and then there it is just in case. Yeah.
So okay. So that's a very good answer, but I think we have one other very important question that we have to ask, and this one falls to you, Sarah. Has your heart decided whether you are Hufflepuff or Gryffindor? This has been, I know, very much on your mind.
I mean, well, if I can be honest, it kind of hasn't totally been on my mind. I'm dealing with a lot of other like boring stuff, like moving. I think my heart has settled on Gryffindor, mostly because I just don't think I'm nice enough to be in Hufflepuff. Like, I'm really not. I think I'm a little too competitive. I guess maybe I'm just a little. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about like what my friend Allison and I were just talking about, like the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram and all these other personality tests in the primary world. And like, I'm wondering, what's the relationship between those stuff and characters in Harry Potter that definitely exists, by the way, like some BuzzFeed article, like pairs all the Myers-Briggs qualities to
we'll have
characters
to do
in Harry Potter,
which is statistically borne out. We'll have to get you that and do that with them. Okay, so
but I think I've settled on Gryffindor, mostly because the more I read, the more I don't think I'm like a Harry version of Gryffindor, and I don't really think I'm even like a Ron version of Gryffindor, though maybe that's why I don't like him, is because I'm more like him than I want to admit. But you see, like Neville, who really doesn't seem to have some of like the like the traditional version of courage that or nerve that the Sorting Hat speaks of, and he's still in Gryffindor. And Hermione seems like she could easily do well in Ravenclaw, but she's still there as well. So that there's like this mystery to it that like I think I'm friendly enough ish, but like I'm not I think I'm more interested in like the pursuit of things and exploration. I love to travel and see new things, and I see that kind of as less of a competition with other people and more like a competition with myself. I feel like I'm constantly in that world of how can I one up something from my past. And that seems to be like kind of Gryffindor-esque.
I can just imagine Hufflepuff Wes sitting in his chair right now, petting a cat, smelling like some bacon, and being in heaven.
Cats. Okay, time out. Cats are gross. Cats are not okay.
Oh wow!
So maybe that inherently makes me not a Hufflepuff. I do love baking. I love baking. So maybe Hufflepuff would be like, maybe I'd be able to like be, overtures to the Hufflepuff, but I think I've settled on Gryffindor.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, it sounds the desire for one-upping and the not necessarily needing food smells near yourself at all times. Well,
no, I don't.
Also, I know that you just experienced something of a small tragedy, and we wanted to do a small reading about that. Did you want to do that next time afterwards?
Yeah, I think maybe doing it next time would be good. Tomorrow's the funeral, and I'll be maybe next time.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit, and we'll certainly be talking about that some in book 4, which it looks like we're penciling in to do. And so that's wonderful. Any concluding thoughts from you, Wes, or you, Sarah?
I think I'm still really intrigued by the dissension among the ranks of the Centaurs. Maybe we can talk about that next time. I know we talked about them, like what they might represent mythologically, but what do you do if you know something?
Perhaps Ferenz is like Harry when he sees that something could be wrong in the interpretation. He takes a stand and maybe he too is breaking a rule based on seeing a greater truth.
Yes,
something like that. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Wes?
Where's your moral? When Bane says, have we not sworn ourselves not to set ourselves against the heavens? Have we not read what is to come? Like, are they abdicating moral responsibility by saying, it is what it is. Like, this is what will happen.
Right.
So we're gonna choose to be bystanders because this is the arc of the universe, and this is it reminds me a little bit of the elves. Quite frankly, in the Lord of the Rings, that who are really resistant to give advice and to get involved. And it's the elves of Mirkwood, like Legolas, who are far more active than the high elves, who just want to go west and get the hell out of there. I don't know. I have a problem with that. I think I find that morally. I have a problem with Bane and Ronan's morality.
Well, perfect. And Wes?
No, that was the main thing I was interested in. I think was the combination of the unicorn and the centaurs here, and I think we got a good chance to talk about those things. So something interesting. I'm just going to mention this very quickly is that another hybrid creature we see in Dante in the Purgatorio that represents the Christ figure is a griffin, which is half lion and half eagle, both regal creatures. And so these hybrid creatures being in there representing, this instinctual thing or this act of violence against nature, but also this sort of connection of the earthly and the celestial is in an embodiment is
Very interesting. Very interesting. We're in a chapter where the road or where the rubber seems to hit the pavement.
Can I throw out one final thing? Is that possibly why Ron is not in these chapters? Just because like Harry is a bit of a hybrid, Hermione we know is a hybrid, Hagrid is a hybrid. We've talked about that. Like, I know it might simply be like a fault of the of plotting that they have too many characters, but it's maybe the characters who are there are the ones who are most stuck in between something. Just to throw that out there, because Ron really seems like he's quite neatly situated within the wizarding world. I mean, he knows all about the dragons, and of course there are native dragons in Britain, and like the others are, for one reason or another, they don't fit in either place they seem to be from. That's maybe something to think about.
Yeah, well, all right. I guess the magic continues and concludes, and then we'll begin again next time.
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, till then.
All right. Take it easy, fellas.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.